I forgot to tell my son the camera was on, and what I saw in that footage was truly disturbing. It all began with a simple desire for peace of mind. After my husband, Robert, passed away 8 months ago, the silence in our once bustling house felt heavy and full of shadows. Every creak of the old floorboards, every rustle of leaves against the windows, made my heart jump. At 62, I was living alone in the sprawling colonial we'd built together, and the house felt less like a home and more like a tomb filled with memories. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. My sister, Laura, had practically begged me to get a security system before I left for my trip to visit her in Florida. She'd always been the practical one, and I, too shaken by grief to argue, had finally given in. The security company promised it was simple, a blinking red light for my front hall, and an app on my phone to check in anytime. Set it and forget it, they said, and for the first 5 days of my trip, I had done just that. I was busy, distracted by Laura's endless chatter and her insistent schedule of manicures, dinners, and walks along the beach. She was trying to pull me out of the darkness, and I appreciated the effort, even if it exhausted me. But on the 6th day, a familiar restlessness settled in. The kind of worry that only a mother can understand, a low hum of anxiety that never quite leaves you. I kept thinking about the coffee maker. Had I unplugged it? What if a fire started? It was a ridiculous thought, I knew, but it gnawed at me. So, I grabbed my phone, found the security app, and opened it. The screen flickered to life, showing the familiar, unmoving view of my front entrance. I breathed a sigh of relief. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. Then, the front door swung open and I froze. It was my son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah. They were using the emergency key I had given them. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it nearly made me cry. Mark had promised to check on the house while I was away. It was a comfort to see him honoring that promise, a tiny flicker of the boy who had always looked after me. But my sense of calm didn't last long. They didn't head for the kitchen to water the plants, or toward the mail pile on the table. Instead, they moved with a purpose that felt unsettling. Their voices were hushed, barely audible through the camera's tiny microphone. "Already checked upstairs," Sarah said, her voice tight with tension. "It has to be in his office." I frowned, a knot tightening in my stomach. The office. Robert's office. A room I hadn't stepped foot in since the day he died. It was a shrine to his life, to his work, to the man I thought I had known. "Mom never goes in there anymore," Mark replied, his voice a low whisper. "Not since the funeral." They disappeared down the long hallway, heading toward that room, a place I had deliberately avoided for months. My initial relief turned into a cold dread, a feeling of violation. Why were they in there? What were they looking for? My thumb hovered over the screen, and I pressed the button to increase the volume, straining to hear what they were saying. The sound filled the quiet Florida hotel room, a distorted static punctuated by hushed voices. I watched as they entered the office, the camera following their movements from the hallway. Sarah went to the large oak desk, the one where Robert had spent so many hours, while Mark began to search the bookshelves. They were working methodically, with a clear goal in mind. They weren't looking for a lost remote or a book. They were searching for something specific. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The office had always been Robert's private sanctuary, and he had been meticulous about keeping it organized. It was strange, seeing them rummage through his things as if they were expecting to find some hidden treasure. A chill ran down my spine. The way they moved, the intensity in their eyes, it was not the casual curiosity of a son and his wife checking in on a grieving mother's house. It was a desperate hunt. Sarah pulled a drawer out of the desk, its contents spilling onto the floor. "Nothing here," she said, her voice laced with frustration. Mark pulled a book from a shelf, fanning through the pages. "Why would he keep it here?" he whispered, his face a mask of worry. My heart hammered in my chest. What were they talking about? What could Robert have possibly had in his office that would make my son and daughter-in-law search my home behind my back, using their emergency key as a key to my trust? I felt a wave of dizziness, the comfortable warmth of the Florida sun suddenly feeling like a distant memory. This wasn't about a coffee maker. This was about a secret. And whatever that secret was, it was so important, so valuable, or so dangerous that my own son was willing to betray my trust to find it. I watched them, my breath caught in my throat as they continued their frantic search, their movements growing more desperate by the second. I felt a sense of dread as I saw Sarah's hand reach for a small, unassuming lockbox sitting at the back of the bookshelf, a box I had never seen before. A small, chilling voice in the back of my head told me that whatever was inside that box was the very thing they were looking for, and it was going to change everything I thought I knew about my husband and my family. This was just the beginning. The moment Sarah's hand closed around the small, heavy box, a wave of coldness washed over me, far stronger than the air conditioning in the hotel room. It was an old-fashioned box, the kind you see in movies, with a brass clasp and a delicate, aged look. My husband, Robert, had never been a man for sentimental trinkets. His life had been about order, about spreadsheets, about meticulously planned vacations and investments. A hidden, locked box in his office felt like an impossible puzzle piece that just didn't fit. I watched Sarah's fingers trembling slightly as she tried the clasp. It was locked. Mark, my son, who had always been so confident and sure of himself, looked suddenly lost. His shoulders were slumped, a mirror image of the grief I had seen on his face after his father's funeral. "It's locked," Sarah whispered, her voice a thin thread of disappointment. "He must have had a key." A new, terrible thought hit me. Had they been through the entire house, searching for this one key? Had they already rummaged through my own things, through the very fabric of my life, without my knowledge? The betrayal stung, a sharp, physical pain in my chest. I felt a surge of anger, a heat rising in my face, and for the first time since Robert's death, it wasn't grief I felt, but a furious indignation. Mark shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know where he would have kept it," he said, the whisper in his voice now laced with frustration. "He was always so careful." He walked over to a bookshelf and grabbed a small bronze sculpture that had sat there for years. It was a replica of a classic Roman bust, a silly tourist souvenir from our trip to Italy. Robert had always found it amusing, a small piece of levity in his otherwise serious office. I watched, my heart pounding, as Mark turned it over in his hands. He pushed a small button on the base, and a hidden compartment popped open. Inside, nestled in a velvet lining, was a tiny, ornate key. Sarah let out a small gasp. "I knew it," she said, relief flooding her voice. "He was too smart not to hide it." My mind spun. Robert hiding things? It was a concept so foreign to me. I had always believed we shared everything, that there were no secrets between us. We had been together for 40 years. We had built a life, a family, a home. How could a man I had known so intimately have hidden a key in a bust I had bought him for a box I had never seen? It was as if I was watching a stranger on the screen, a different man entirely, a man capable of secrets and deception. The old, familiar ache of grief was replaced by a hollow emptiness, a feeling that the ground beneath me had crumbled away. What else didn't I know about him? Sarah took the key, her hand still shaking, and with a soft click, the box sprang open. My eyes were glued to the screen. Inside the box were not jewels or money, but a stack of documents neatly folded and a small, worn photograph. Sarah picked up the photograph first. It was a picture of Robert, a much younger Robert, with a woman I didn't recognize. Her hair was a bright, fiery red, and she had a wide, mischievous smile. She was clutching his arm, and they both looked so happy, so carefree, in a way I had not seen Robert look in years. A wave of nausea hit me. Who was she? Was this what this was all about? A secret affair from long ago? A ghost from his past I never knew existed? The thought was a dagger to my heart. But Mark's voice cut through my thoughts. "Look at this," he said, his voice flat with disbelief. He held up a document. "This isn't a will, it's a letter. Addressed to me." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide. "What does it say?" she asked, her voice a hushed whisper. "It's a confession," Mark said, his voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear it. "A confession about the company, about the missing money. He says he embezzled it. For years, he's been stealing from his own company. The world tilted. The dizziness I had felt earlier returned with a vengeance. Embezzlement? Robert? It was insane. He was an honorable man, a respected pillar of the community. He had been a partner at the firm for 30 years. He was the one who lectured us on financial responsibility, the one who always paid the bills on time, who never took a single shortcut. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, a hysterical sound that died before it could escape. This was a nightmare. This had to be some terrible joke. But the look on my son's face, the raw agony and shock, told me this was all too real. Robert had not only had a secret life, he had a secret criminal life. The man I had loved and mourned for months was a stranger, a ghost. And now that ghost was haunting my son, my family, with the consequences of his betrayal. The photograph of the woman with the red hair suddenly seemed insignificant. This was the real secret. This was the real pain. And I was witnessing it, helpless and alone, through a tiny screen thousands of miles away. A suffocating silence filled the room, the only sound the faint, distorted static from my phone. I saw Sarah's hand shake as she opened the letter and began to read, her face pale, her lips moving as she absorbed my husband's words. I saw Mark's face, a mask of pure devastation, as he looked at the letter, then at the photo of the woman with the red hair, then back at the letter again. This wasn't a secret. This was an unraveling, a slow, agonizing descent into a truth so ugly it felt like a physical assault. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The man I had loved for 40 years, the father of my son, the pillar of our community, was a thief. The letter, I now understood, was his final act of cowardice, a confession left for my son to find, a burden he had to bear alone. I had been so proud of Robert, of our life together. I had thought we had built something beautiful, something based on love and honesty. But now it all felt like a lie. The vacations, the expensive gifts, the comfortable life we had lived. Was it all purchased with stolen money? Was I an accomplice without even knowing it? My eyes were drawn back to the photograph. The woman with the red hair. Her smile was so vibrant, so full of life. It felt like an accusation. Was she the reason? Was this a secret family? My heart ached, a deep, hollow pain that felt worse than the grief of his death. At least with his death, I had the comfort of a love story, a memory of a good man. Now that story was gone, replaced by this cruel, devastating reality. I felt a surge of rage, a desperate, irrational anger at Robert for his lies, for leaving me to clean up the mess, for betraying my son's trust. Mark dropped into the chair behind the desk, his head in his hands. He was crying, not the quiet, dignified tears of a man mourning his father, but the wrenching sobs of a boy who had just lost his hero. How could he do this, Sarah? He choked out, his voice thick with pain. After everything he taught me, everything he told me about being an honest man, Sarah knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him. We'll figure it out, Mark, she whispered. We'll figure it out together. I wanted to reach through the screen and hold my son. I wanted to tell him that I had no idea, that this was as much a shock to me as it was to him. But I was miles away, a helpless observer, a ghost in my own home. I watched them, my son and his wife, a secret partnership forged in the ashes of a father's betrayal. They looked so young, so burdened by a weight that should never have been theirs. I realized then that my son had not been searching for this box to expose his father, but to protect him. He must have known something, suspected something, and he had come to find this confession before anyone else could. He was trying to protect Robert's memory, to protect me. The thought filled me with an even greater sense of shame. I was so wrapped up in my own grief, my own pain, that I hadn't seen the signs. I hadn't seen the fear in my son's eyes. I watched as Sarah took the letter and tucked it back into the box. We need to figure out what to do, she said, her voice full of a new, fierce determination. This changes everything. We have to be smart about this. Mark nodded, his face streaked with tears. We can't let this get out, he said, his voice hard. Not now, not ever. He picked up the photograph of the woman with the red hair. Who is this? He asked, his voice filled with a desperate curiosity. Sarah looked at it, then back at the letter. The letter mentions her, she said, her voice quiet. Her name is Ellen. She paused, her eyes widening. And she was his partner. In the company. The one who helped him do it. My mind reeled. Ellen. Not an affair. A partner in crime. The deception ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about stolen money or a hidden life. It was about a whole different reality, a life I had known nothing about, filled with people I had never met. The man I had shared my bed with for 4 decades was a criminal mastermind, and I had been a fool, blissfully unaware. The camera continued to roll, but I no longer saw my son and his wife. I saw 2 strangers standing in the ruins of a life I had thought was mine, trying to piece together a story that I no longer recognized. My own life felt like a film reel, playing out a script I had never been given. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the final scene was still a long way off. The discovery that the woman in the photograph, Ellen, was not a secret lover but a partner in crime hit me harder than any revelation of an affair could have. It added a layer of cold, calculating malice to Robert's actions that I hadn't considered. An affair, at least, was a crime of passion, a weakness of the flesh. This, however, was a methodical betrayal, a deliberate act of deception that had been unfolding for years, right under my nose. Robert had not been a man with a secret heart. He had been a man with a secret life, and every aspect of it, from his professional success to our comfortable retirement, was built on a foundation of lies. The shock was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I watched as Sarah read more of the letter, her expression shifting from shock to a kind of grim resignation. He says they were partners, professionally, she said, her voice a low murmur. They were the ones who moved the money. He's taking full responsibility. But he says she's the only other person who knows the whole story. Mark's face, which had been so full of grief, now hardened into something I barely recognized. It was a look of cold, focused determination. Then we need to find her, he said. If anyone can tell us what happened to the money, it's her. They began to discuss a plan, their voices hushed, their movements quick and purposeful. It was a strategy session, the kind of conversation they might have had about a business venture, only this was about a family's reputation, a father's legacy, and the potential ruin of everything we had built. They talked about law firms, about private investigators, about the risks of a public scandal. I listened, my heart a dull thud in my chest, feeling completely disconnected from the people on my screen. I was a spectator in my own life, watching 2 strangers make decisions about a future I no longer recognized. They were no longer the son and daughter-in-law I knew. They were 2 people, burdened by a terrible secret, trying to clean up a mess they had no part in creating. My mind drifted back to Ellen's photograph, to the vibrant smile and the fierce red hair. I tried to remember if Robert had ever mentioned a woman named Ellen. A colleague? A client? The name felt entirely new, a phantom from a part of his life I had never been privy to. The more I learned, the less I knew. He had not just hidden his work. He had hidden a whole person, a whole world. And now that world was bleeding into mine, tainting everything with its shadow. I felt a surge of irrational anger, not at Robert, but at Ellen. She was the one who had helped him, the one who had known. She was the other side of the coin, the other half of the secret. My focus shifted from the pain of Robert's betrayal to a burning curiosity about this woman. Who was she? And what did she know? Mark looked up, his eyes meeting the camera lens for a fleeting moment. A shiver ran down my spine. It was a tiny, inconsequential thing, a simple glance, but it felt like a direct connection. Did he know I was watching? Was this his way of telling me? My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer just a passive observation. It was a violation. My son was using the camera to look at me, to find me, to know my every move. He wasn't just trying to find the truth about his father. He was trying to find out what I knew, what I suspected, how much of his father's secret life had been shared with me. The feeling of betrayal, which had been so sharp a moment ago, now felt dull and heavy, a constant presence in my gut. I felt a new wave of fear, cold and sharp, as I watched my son, my own flesh and blood, plot in my home, in the office of my late husband. I no longer knew who to trust. And the most frightening realization of all was that the one person I thought I knew better than anyone was the very one who had fooled me completely. My life had been built on a lie, and the camera, my own tool for comfort, had become the cruel mirror reflecting the truth. It was a truth I had not been prepared to face, a truth that felt infinitely more disturbing than any ghost or burglar ever could. My own family had become strangers, and the secrets they held were more dangerous than any I could have imagined. I had to know more. I had to find out everything. And the only way to do that was to keep watching. The next scene was waiting for me, and I couldn't look away. Next full-length Lecco. The silence in the office was so thick it felt like something alive. I could hear every whispered word, every shuffle of paper, every intake of breath. Mark stood, his face a grim mask, as he reread the letter for what must have been the third time. Sarah was on her phone, typing furiously, a look of fierce concentration on her face. The calm determination that had settled over them felt more terrifying than their initial shock. They weren't just reacting to a secret anymore. They were strategizing, planning, moving forward with an unwavering purpose that I knew, instinctively, would lead them down a dangerous path. He mentions a location, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. A storage unit, on the west side of town. The key number is written here, on the back of the envelope. She held up the piece of paper, and I could just make out the small, neat handwriting of my husband, a final breadcrumb leading to God knows what. He says it contains the financial records. Everything. My breath hitched in my throat. The missing money, the years of fraud, it was all there, neatly packaged and waiting. Mark's eyes widened. And the other key, he asked, his voice low. The one to the safe deposit box? The letter says it's with his old friend, George. He was the only one he trusted. My stomach clenched into a hard knot. George Peterson, Robert's oldest and dearest friend, a man who had been a regular presence in our lives for 30 years. He had given the eulogy at Robert's funeral, his voice breaking with grief as he spoke of their lifelong friendship. Now, I saw his face in a new, sinister light. Was he in on it too? Was he a part of this web of lies and deceit that had been my life? The world I had known, the one that had felt so solid and true, was dissolving before my eyes. Every person I had trusted, every relationship I had cherished, now seemed suspect, tainted by the shadow of Robert's betrayal. Mark and Sarah discussed their next steps in hushed tones, but I had stopped listening. My mind was reeling, replaying every moment with Robert, every conversation. Had he seemed different? Had I missed the warning signs? I thought back to the last months of his life. He had been so quiet, so pensive. I had attributed it to his age, to the gradual slowing down that comes with retirement. But now I saw it for what it was, the immense weight of his lies, a crushing burden he had carried in silence. I remembered him sitting in his chair in the evenings, his gaze fixed on a distant point, his hands clenching and unclenching on the armrests. I had thought he was just tired. Now I realized he was terrified. A new emotion, one I hadn't felt since all of this began, started to rise within me. A deep, aching pity for the man I had loved. He hadn't been a monster. He had been a man caught in a web of his own making, unable to find a way out. He had chosen to run from the truth, to bury it, to let his family find it only after he was gone. He had left us to clean up the mess, to face the consequences of his actions. I felt a pang of guilt. I had been so angry at his lies, but I hadn't stopped to consider the fear that must have driven him. He had chosen cowardice over truth, but he had chosen it out of a misplaced desire to protect us. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I saw Mark get up, his movements quick and decisive. He went to the desk, pulled out a pen and a small notepad, and began to write. "I'll go to the storage unit tomorrow morning," he said. "You call Dad's lawyer and see if he knows anything. And don't mention anything to him about the letter. We'll handle this on our own." Sarah nodded, her face grim. "What about George?" she asked. "We'll have to deal with him, too. He's probably expecting this." Mark's jaw tightened. "I'll handle George," he said, his voice hard. The sound of his voice, so full of resolve, sent a shiver down my spine. This was my son, the boy I had raised with such care, now stepping into a world of secrets and danger, all to protect his father's ruined reputation. I had to do something. I looked down at my phone, at the tiny, moving images of my children in my home. I was a spectator no more. I had to be a part of this. I had to help them. I had to find a way to get ahead of them, to warn them, to protect them from whatever was waiting for them at that storage unit. My fear was gone, replaced by a mother's fierce, protective instinct. I had to get back home. I had to talk to Laura. She was the one who had urged me to get the camera in the first place. She would know what to do. I closed the app, my hands shaking, and started to pack my bags. I was no longer a grieving widow on vacation. I was a mother on a mission. And the first step was to get on the next plane home. The flight home was an endless, agonizing blur of recycled air and muted airplane noises. I had left Florida in a panicked rush, the tropical heat a distant memory, replaced by the bone-chilling cold of my own fear. My sister, Laura, had been a whirlwind of frantic questions, but I had offered only vague, hurried answers, telling her I had to return for a family emergency. She had looked at me with a worried frown, her hand on my arm, but I had pulled away, my mind already 1,000 miles away, consumed by the tiny, pixelated figures I had left behind in my home. In the small, cramped space of my airplane seat, I replayed the footage again and again in my mind. The images and whispered words burned into my memory. My son, Mark, and his wife, Sarah, rummaging through my late husband's most private belongings. The locked box, the photograph of the red-haired woman, the letter, the cruel, heartless confession that had turned my life into a lie. I felt a pang of guilt every time the images flickered in my mind. I was a spy in my own home, a voyeur to my family's most devastating secret. But the guilt was quickly overshadowed by a sense of righteous anger. Robert had left a ticking time bomb for my son to find, a secret that could destroy his reputation, his life. And I had been so blind, so wrapped up in my own grief, that I hadn't seen a single sign of the darkness that had consumed him. I thought about George, Robert's oldest friend, the man who had been a regular presence in our lives for decades, the man who had held my hand and told me how much he would miss his best friend at Robert's funeral. Was he a co-conspirator? Was he in on the lies? A different kind of grief, one of betrayal, began to settle in my gut. I had thought my world had been irrevocably shattered when Robert died, but now I saw that his death was just the beginning of the end. He had left behind a trail of destruction that I was now forced to navigate, a map of his lies that led to a truth so ugly it made my skin crawl. When the plane finally touched down, I was a different woman than the one who had left. The lightheartedness of my vacation was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. I didn't even bother to stop for my luggage, grabbing a taxi and giving the driver my address. The old colonial house, the one I had left just a few days ago, looked different now. It didn't feel like a sanctuary. It felt like a crime scene, a place where a terrible secret had been discovered, where a family had been torn apart. I fumbled with my key, my hand shaking, and pushed the door open, the familiar scent of old books and Robert's faint aftershave hitting me in a wave of painful nostalgia. The house was silent, a silence that now felt heavy with secrets. I went straight to Robert's office. The door was ajar, a silent invitation to a room I had been too afraid to enter for months. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. Everything was as I had seen it on the screen. The desk drawer slightly ajar, a small stack of papers on the floor, the empty space on the bookshelf where the Roman bust had been. It was proof, tangible proof, of the scene I had witnessed. The room felt colder, emptier, haunted not by Robert's ghost, but by the ghosts of his lies. I walked over to the desk, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood. I sat in his chair, the one he had sat in every day for 30 years, and looked around the room. I felt a sudden, irrational need to find the box, to hold it in my hands, to feel the weight of his secrets. I looked for the hidden compartment, for the place where he had kept the key. I was so focused on finding the physical proof that I didn't hear the footsteps behind me until it was too late. A voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear, and I froze, my hand hovering over a loose floorboard. Mom, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Florida. It was Mark. His face was a mask of shock and confusion, a mixture of a boy who had been caught and a man who was burdened with a terrible secret. He was holding a small cardboard box. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of emotions I couldn't name. Betrayal, fear, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. The game was over. I had been caught, but I wasn't just a spectator anymore. I was a player, and I was about to find out just how high the stakes were. The blood drained from my face, leaving me feeling as cold and hollow as the house itself. I backed away from the desk, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Mark stood in the doorway, a small cardboard box clutched tightly in his hands, his face a mix of shock and confusion. Mom, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? I thought you were in Florida. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. I could have lied, could have invented some last-minute reason for my hurried return. But the lie would have felt hollow, a cheap facade over the ugly truth. My gaze dropped from his face to the box in his hands. It was the same one I had seen him carry from the car in the camera footage. I could ask you the same thing, Mark, I said, my voice shaking. What are you doing here? What are you doing with that box? He flinched, his shoulders tensing, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy who used to hide in his room when he was in trouble. The man he had become, so burdened and serious, dissolved, replaced by a painful vulnerability. I was just checking on the house, Mom, he said, his eyes avoiding mine. Sarah and I came to get a few things. To keep the place from feeling empty. The lie was as transparent as glass. A silence stretched between us, thick with the weight of our shared secrets. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I finally met his gaze, my eyes filling with tears. Don't lie to me, Mark, I said, my voice breaking. I know. I've been watching you. His face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks as the full weight of my confession settled over him. He knew what I meant. He knew I had seen them in this room, seen them find the box, seen him with the letter. The small, private world he and Sarah had built around their father's secret had just crumbled. The betrayal I had felt, the anger at his lies, it was all mirrored on his face, but it was directed at me. You were watching, he said, his voice laced with disbelief and a deep, cutting hurt. You were spying on us? The accusation stung, but I stood my ground. You were sneaking around in your dead father's office, looking for something behind my back. I retorted, the anger that had been simmering for days finally bubbling to the surface. What was I supposed to think? I didn't know what was happening. I was scared. I had to know. I had a right to know. My words were a torrent of raw emotion, a desperate attempt to justify my actions, to explain the fear that had been my constant companion for the past few days. Mark's shoulders slumped. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a familiar weariness, a sadness that was so much like his father's in the last few months of his life. You're right, Mom, he said, his voice tired. I'm sorry. We should have told you. But we couldn't. We didn't want to worry you. We found a letter. From Dad. He left it for me. He paused, looking down at the box in his hands, as if it held the entire weight of his life. It's about the company. About missing funds. About his partner, Ellen. She helped him do it. The words, though I had already heard them, still hit me with the force of a physical blow. To hear him say it out loud, to hear my son confirm his father's crimes, made it all real, all too tangible. I sank into Robert's chair, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. The man I had loved for so long was gone, a ghost replaced by a criminal. The money, I whispered, the words barely audible. Where is it? Mark finally walked into the room, setting the box on the desk. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a new understanding, a shared grief that now bound us together. We don't know, he said. The letter said the financial records are in a storage unit, but the key to the main accounts, the safe deposit box. He left that with George. We were just on our way to his place. We think he knows everything. My mind raced, trying to put the pieces together. The storage unit, the friend, the partner. The money. It was a trail of breadcrumbs, a final, cruel treasure hunt designed by a dying man to shift the burden of his sins onto the shoulders of his family. We have to go to George's house, I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. We have to find out what he knows. We have to finish this. Mark nodded, a silent agreement passing between us. The anger, the mistrust, the sense of betrayal had not vanished, but for the first time in days, we were no longer on opposite sides. We were united, two people facing a nightmare together, and we were about to walk straight into it. Mark, his face a grim mask, walked ahead of me to the car, and I followed, the silence between us filled with the terrible weight of our discovery. We had agreed to face George together, but a new, unspoken tension hung in the air. He was a man with a secret, and I was a woman who had been spying on him. The trust between us was a fragile thing, a shattered mirror we were now trying to piece back together in the wreckage of his father's lies. The drive to George's house was a long one, the suburban landscape a blur of familiar streets and houses that no longer felt like home. My mind was a kaleidoscope of images. Robert's face in the photograph, smiling with a woman I now knew was his partner in crime. George's face at the funeral, his voice choked with emotion. Had he been acting? Had he been mourning a friend? Or a partner in a deception that had lasted for years? When we pulled up to George's house, my stomach was in knots. He lived in a modest, well-kept home with a bright red door, a symbol of a cheerful normalcy that now felt like a cruel joke. Mark turned off the engine, the sudden silence of the car feeling louder than the hum of the engine had been. He looked at me, his eyes full of a pain I recognized all too well. It was the same pain I had seen in the mirror when I looked at my own face in the mornings. "Ready, Mom?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, not trusting my voice to speak. We walked to the door and Mark pressed the doorbell. The chimes echoed through the quiet afternoon, a sound that, under different circumstances, would have been welcoming. George opened the door, a wide, easy smile on his face that faltered the moment he saw us. His eyes, kind and crinkled at the corners, scanned my face, then Mark's, and his smile vanished, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He stepped aside, a silent invitation to come in. The inside of his house was as warm and comforting as I remembered. The scent of coffee and old books hung in the air, and a small, gray cat was curled up in a patch of sunlight on the floor. It was a home, not a crime scene. A wave of doubt washed over me. Could this man, this kind, gentle man, really be a part of this mess? We sat on his worn couches, and George poured us coffee, his hands steady, his movements deliberate. He didn't ask us why we were there. He didn't have to. The truth was written on our faces. He sat across from us, his hands clasped over his coffee cup, and waited. It was a patient, painful silence. Mark finally broke it. "We know George," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "We found the letter, the one Dad left for me. We know about the company, and about Ellen." George closed his eyes, a deep sigh escaping his lips. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. "I was wondering when you would find it," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I always knew he had left something behind. He told me he couldn't leave without making it right." My heart hammered in my chest. So he knew. The betrayal was real. The kind, gentle man was a lie. "Right?" I said, my voice sharp with disbelief. "How is any of this right?" George looked at me, his eyes filled with a new kind of pain. It wasn't the grief of a friend. It was the sorrow of a man who had been burdened with a terrible secret for years. "It's not what you think, Catherine," he said, using my name for the first time. The sound of it, the simple familiarity of it, felt like a distant echo from a life that was long gone. Robert didn't embezzle money. He wasn't a criminal. He was trying to expose one. He looked at Mark. "Your father was working with the FBI. He had been for years. Ellen, she was a partner in his scheme, but a willing one. She wasn't just his partner in the company. She was his partner in a deep undercover operation." My breath hitched in my throat. This was the biggest twist yet, a shocking, unexpected turn that changed everything. My mind reeled. Robert, an FBI informant? My husband, a hero? The photograph of Ellen, the letter, the hidden key. It wasn't a trail of deceit, but a trail of evidence. The secrets weren't about a life of crime, but a life of incredible courage and sacrifice. My anger, my fear, my sense of betrayal, it all dissolved, replaced by a crushing wave of humility and awe. I had been so blind, so certain of my own pain, that I hadn't seen the truth that was right in front of me. The camera hadn't shown me a disturbing secret. It had shown me the final, heroic act of a man I hadn't truly known, a man who was so much more than I had ever given him credit for. The next step was to find Ellen, to find out the truth, and to finally understand the man I had loved. And the next section was about to reveal that final, crucial piece of the puzzle. The truth hung in the air, a shocking, unexpected gift. My breath caught in my throat as I processed George's words. Robert wasn't a criminal. He was a hero. The dizziness that had plagued me for days returned, not from fear, but from the sudden, jarring shift in my reality. He wasn't the man I thought I had known. He was so much more. The man who had sat in his chair, tired and withdrawn, wasn't a man burdened by lies, but by a mission of immense importance, a mission that had taken a toll on his body and soul. The photograph of Ellen wasn't a painful betrayal, but a quiet testament to a secret partnership. And the letter, the cruel, heartless confession I had judged him for, was a final act of courage, a way to ensure his work was not in vain. The tears that streamed down my face were no longer for a life built on a lie, but for a man I had failed to truly see. Mark, too, was speechless. His face, which had been so hard and full of pain, softened, the lines of worry around his eyes smoothing out. "The FBI," he whispered, his voice full of disbelief. "Why didn't he tell us? Why did he have to do it alone?" George looked at him, his own eyes brimming with tears. "He couldn't," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He was so close to retirement, so close to bringing Ellen's boss, the head of the whole operation, down for good. He was dying, Mark. His heart was failing him. The stress was eating him alive. He knew he didn't have much time left, so he had to leave the final evidence for you to find. He didn't want to involve us, to put us in danger. He was a good man, Mark. A very good man. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The late nights in his office, the distracted moments, the hushed phone calls, I had thought it was the stress of his job, the grind of a long career. It had been something else entirely. It had been the weight of a secret life, a life of danger and courage that he had chosen to live to protect the very people he had been lying to. I looked at Mark, my son, my beautiful, kind son, and saw the raw pain in his eyes. He had lost his father twice, first to death, and then to a truth that he had never expected. And now he had found him again, in the most unexpected of places, in the heroic, secret life he had been living all along. We spent the rest of the afternoon with George, listening as he recounted stories of Robert's bravery, his meticulous planning, his fierce determination to bring down the corrupt people who had been stealing from their company and leaving a trail of ruined lives in their wake. He showed us the key to the safe deposit box, a small, worn object that now felt as heavy as a piece of history. When we finally stood up to leave, the silence between us was no longer heavy with suspicion, but with a new, shared understanding. We had both been wrong, so wrong, and in our error we had found a new connection, a new way to understand each other. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with FBI agents, lawyers, and financial specialists. The evidence Robert had left behind was airtight, and within a few months, Ellen and her boss were arrested and charged with massive fraud. Robert's name was cleared, his legacy restored, but it didn't change the fact that he was gone. The camera, my tool for spying, had become a cruel but necessary tool for the truth, showing me a side of my husband I had never known. The moral of our story was not that secrets are always bad, but that we can never truly know the full story of another person. We are all living our own lives, fighting our own battles, and the people we love are so much more than the small, incomplete images we hold in our minds. Months passed, and the old colonial house began to feel like home again. The shadows that had once filled the hallways were gone, replaced by the warm glow of sunlight. I still missed Robert, a deep, aching void that would never be filled, but the pain had changed. It was no longer a grief for a life that was a lie, but a quiet sadness for the heroic man I had lost. I had learned to move forward. I had started taking a painting class at the local community college, the same one where Ellen had once taken classes. The blank canvas in front of me was a symbol of my new life, a future unwritten and full of possibility. One evening, I sat on the porch swing, a cup of coffee in my hand, and watched as Mark and Sarah pulled into the driveway. Mark, my son, my beautiful boy, now a man who had faced a great trial and come out stronger. He had learned the meaning of trust and the pain of betrayal. He had learned that sometimes the greatest acts of love are the ones we can never fully understand. He walked up the porch steps, his arm around Sarah's waist, a wide, easy smile on his face. "We have some good news, Mom," he said, his voice full of an unburdened joy I hadn't heard in years. "The baby is a girl." My eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of overwhelming joy. A new life, a new beginning, a new hope. My heart, which had been so cold for so long, finally felt a flicker of warmth. I had lost a husband, but I had gained a new understanding of love and a newfound respect for my own strength. The camera had been on, and what I saw was disturbing, yes, but it was also a gift. The greatest gift of all, the truth. And in that truth, I had found a way to heal and a new life to live.